Last month, my spouse and I took a trip to Salem, Massachusetts. Ben wanted to see the renowned regional museum that is there, so we got tickets and reserved the earliest time slot in the morning. All the exhibits capped attendance because of the pandemic, sometimes to numbers in the single digits. So the docents had extra time for museum visitors, and soon ours was peppering us with questions and making small talk. Where did we come from? He wanted to know. Not far, Ben answered, only an hour away in Watertown. You have a lot of history there, too, he told us with obvious approval. Of course, we have history everywhere all the time. Always, history is at once burden and boon. That seems particularly true in Salem, which was established in 1630 as part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It is known for any number of things: its prominence as an American port, its literary legacies, and of course, its horrible witch trials, which figure prominently in tourist sites there. It is also home to an important piece of Puritan theology known as the Salem Covenant of 1629. In it, the people of Salem declared, "We covenant and do bind ourselves in the presence of God to walk together in all God's ways, as God is pleased to reveal God's self unto us in blessed word of truth." On our way to the museum, Ben and I passed a storefront church advertising its online worship services. It had that old covenant, complete with original spelling, posted in its front windows, along with a notice, "We still believe this here." At UU Wellesley Hills, we have some history of our own to claim and celebrate, as we will soon commemorate our 150th anniversary in February 2021. Originally, we had planned a series of historical events throughout this program year that would lead up to that date, but those have had to be postponed for obvious reasons. Being a postbellum church means that our congregation has a less fraught and complex history than some of our neighbors. Yet even our relatively brief history has been eventful. We have a few illustrious ministers in our records, but perhaps none more so than the Reverend Dr. James Luther Adams, who served Wellesley Hills briefly during the 1930s. Ours was the last church he would serve in his ministerial career. While serving here, he was recruited into an academic post and spent the rest of his life as a seminary educator, public theologian, social ethicist, and writer. This was his final congregation, and the only other one he served. His first was the one that ordained him as a minister. That was a church in Salem. For a while now, I have suspected that Salem has had an outsized influence not only on Dr. Adams' thought, but on the direction taken by progressive religion in America. Before we Unitarian Universalists outlined our 7 principles and 6 sources of faith, Dr. Adams wrote a seminal essay that introduced what he called the 5 smooth stones of belief. Those proverbial stones made reference to that famous story contained in the Hebrew scriptures of the encounter between David and Goliath. When David confronts Goliath, he is young and small, an unlikely champion for the Israelites in their battle against the Philistines. The king, fearing for the youth's safety, attempts to outfit David in his royal armor, but David complains that he cannot wear it because it is too heavy and he is not used to its weight. Instead, he goes into battle armed only with the 5 smooth stones he fished from that river and his slingshot. That same slingshot he uses to take aim at Goliath. It fells the giant with a single stone. David and Goliath have captured the imaginations of people for millennia because they embody tensions we can immediately recognize between the mighty and the nimble, the favored to win and the underdog, the time-tested and the yet unproven, the established and the emerging. David's triumph is a legendary upset for the ages. He did something novel and unexpected and succeeded. He found a new way to fight and defeat an oppressive force. He saw a need and took a risk. We never learn what became of the remaining 4 of David's 5 stones. We only know that he took hold of all of them and had that number at the ready. Throughout this program year, I will preach a sermon series on each of the 5 smooth stones that Dr. Adams counted off for us, addressing each one in turn in my series on the ultimate aims of liberal religion. In summary, the stones represent these key beliefs. First, that revelation is continuous. Second, that relationships should be consensual instead of coercive. Third, that we have a moral obligation to make efforts for the good of our communities. Fourth, that we must commit ourselves to social organizations that benefit others. And fifth, and finally, that we believe in the potential for positive change and always hold out hope. Today, we begin with that belief that revelation is continuous and still open. Abrahamic faiths such as Judaism are revealed religions, which means they come to us through a history that is even now unfolding. What happens in the past matters, often much more than we would like to admit. With that first smooth stone, Dr. Adams offered us this notion that we are always learning new truths about old circumstances, that history contains as many cautionary tales as it does morality tales, and that we have the option to magnify our shared humanity, no matter who has denied it and for how long. Our collective work in meaning making is never really done, and the seriousness with which we do that work carries major ethical implications for our own era. Salem has changed tremendously over the centuries. It has not only changed since 1629, but also since Dr. Adams was a minister there in 1934, and even since I first visited it 30 years ago as a neophyte travel writer on assignment, writing the New England chapter of a guidebook for US tourists. Salem is not nearly as glib about its historical record as it once was. Its regional museum now contains a plaque naming the traditional Native American territories on which it was built. The Native Park site, honoring its maritime history, acknowledges the complicity of the port in the transatlantic slave trade and includes mentions of enslaved persons in its pamphlets. Among the shops selling Halloween year-round is the somber open-air witch trials memorial, which Ben and I took pains to visit. The Salem witch trials happened during a brief but terrifying span starting in 1692. In a period of mass hysteria and heightened paranoia, 200 people were accused there, many unjustly imprisoned, and 20 people were executed. Others in Massachusetts tried to discourage the court proceedings. They did end in 1693, when all charges of witchcraft were dropped and prisoners released. Within 5 years, both the judge and jurors who heard these cases issued public apologies to the colony, acknowledging the gravity of their errors. In their 1697 apology, the jurors declared, "We confess that we ourselves were not capable to understand, nor able to withstand the mysterious delusions of the air." They added that although there was a want of knowledge in ourselves and better information from others, they still considered information that was insufficient for the touching of the lives of any. Asking heartily for forgiveness, they concluded, "We would none of us do such things again on such grounds for the whole world." Their apology contains poignant echoes of that 1629 covenant that prays for better understanding, a clearer way, and the fresh presence of a blessed word of truth. Honestly, don't all of us have things we would never again do, not for the whole world? How many of us have admitted those publicly? Just before he entered academia, Dr. Adams studied abroad in Nazi Germany, and he left shortly before being detained by the Gestapo. His interest was not scholarly so much as existential. He wanted to know what liberals were doing to confront the rise of the Third Reich. The power of their beliefs was being tested then, and he saw that the liberals there were failing. In his essay on the Five Smooth Stones, Dr. Adams maintained that for any avowed liberal, nothing is complete, and thus nothing is exempt from criticism. Events of word, deed, and nature are not sealed. They point always beyond themselves to inner tensions of peril and opportunity. According to him, staying humble and educable are religious obligations. As much as we would like to be right, we ought to be entirely willing to discover that we have been wrong about any number of things. We have our own delusions today. We too have overlooked the peril and opportunity presented us. We must acknowledge the reality that we already have cause for regret and will have cause for it yet again, individually and communally. In a time of uprising and unrest across this country, Americans are becoming more conscious of the sinister side of our complicated national history. In a controversial address he gave in 1941, Dr. Adams argued that all liberals, be they political or religious, need to take a realistic view of human events. He saw assaults on liberalism coming from both the left and the right on the political spectrum. He told his audience, "We must have the courage not to oversimplify matters. Few things in human history are fixed," he concluded, least of all reputations. We should question who we consider victims and villains and victors and why. Concern for our reputations can overshadow our ultimate allegiance to what is humane and just, and that was why Dr. Adams insisted that religious liberals not forget the need to repent and renounce our wrongs. If we want to become better, we should expect to routinely need to rededicate ourselves to our highest ideals in service to the common good, broadening our vision of what is possible. The Witch Trials Memorial was dedicated 300 years after the fact, in 1992, by Holocaust survivor and Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel, who declared, "If I can't stop all the hate all over the world and all the people, I can stop it in one place within me." We still have our Salems. Who could deny that now? For generations, the residents of Salem have walked together with variable and shifting understandings of what bound them to one another. Sometimes it was fear, and sometimes it was love, and sometimes those two got horribly confused. Today, the friends and members of UU Wellesley Hills heed the advice to take care about what we are worshiping and attend closely to who we are becoming. Because as religious liberals, we believe that matters a great deal. We want to be answerable for our past because we want to imagine a far better future, perhaps ones where we place a little more faith in the upstart David figure and feel a little less terrified of the Goliath, no matter how large he looms. Indeed, we can all grow in genius in protecting what we hold sacred, making the best use of those beliefs we cling to now. Those of you who have ever done target practice know that when you take aim at a moving target, you have to aim slightly ahead of it. Given how much uncertainty we face these days, our future feels very much like a moving target. We need a few smooth stones we can trust to fly far. We must have a shared faith in the ultimate aims of liberal religion outside the latest news cycle. History has taught us a great deal, but some of it must also be unlearned. Our future holds instruction of its own if we only remain open to it.